A retired Special Forces veteran and his once legendary working dog have been living quiet in a winter forest, patching together a life one silent day at a time, trying not to hear the old war inside their bones. But tonight the dog stops, frozen, listening, then pulls him off the trail. In a clearing, he finds something that doesn't belong in nature, a fresh wooden cross planted in the snow, and a police officer bound to it, barely conscious, displayed like a warning sign. This isn't about money. It's about control, about making fear louder than justice. And the real tragedy isn't the rope. It's what it wakes up in a man who swore he'd never go to war again. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, please subscribe for more stories of loyalty, faith, and courage. Snow fell in hard, quiet sheets, and the pine forest held its breath under a wind that sounded like an old door refusing to close. Logan Pierce walked the boundary line the way some men walked a church aisle, careful, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes, even God's. He wasn't out here to be brave. He was out here because the storm had snapped a section of fence on the north edge of his land, and winter didn't forgive small negligence. Logan was 40, built broad through the shoulders in a way that suggested old discipline rather than gym vanity, and his face carried the kind of angles that looked carved instead of grown, a strong jaw, cheekbones that caught the cold light sharply, and a close-trimmed beard that made him appear less approachable than he truly was. His hair, once dark, had begun to gray at the temples, like frost that refused to melt. He kept it clipped short, not for style, but because long hair grabbed sweat, and sweat carried memory. His eyes were a steel blue calm that made strangers think hard, when the people who knew him, few and far between, would have called it careful. He wore the same uniform as if routine could stitch a man back together. A worn brown leather jacket scuffed at the elbows and faded along the seams, a red and black plaid flannel beneath it, old blue jeans, and tall brown lace-up boots built for ice, mud, and the long walk back to being human. The jacket had belonged to him for years. It smelled faintly of smoke and pine resin and something older, metal perhaps, or the ghost of a faraway desert wind he pretended not to remember. At his heel moved Hawk, an 8-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat thick around the neck and slightly silvering at the muzzle, the way wise animals and tired men both begin to show their mileage. Hawk wasn't the kind of dog who wasted energy. His chest was wide, his frame still muscular beneath the fur, but he moved with measured economy, as if every step had to justify itself. One ear carried a small notch like a signature left by an argument he'd once won at a cost. On cold mornings, a stiffness lived in one back leg, and Hawk accepted it the way soldiers accept weather. Unfair, inevitable, not worth complaining about. People sometimes asked Logan why the dog was named Hawk when he was clearly not a bird. Logan never answered. Names were complicated things. Names were promises. Hawk's eyes were dark, intelligent, and uncomfortably patient. He watched the world as if the world was a door that might open the wrong way at any second. Logan understood that kind of watching because he had once watched roads for wires, windows for glints, crowds for the one face that didn't belong. He had trained himself out of that life, or so he told himself. He'd come to this winter forest for quiet. Quiet didn't ask questions. Quiet didn't ask him to stand in the middle of a room and explain why his hand sometimes shook when a radio crackled, or why laughter that sounded too careless could make his stomach go hard as stone. Quiet let him do odd jobs for cash, mending fences, hauling scrap, clearing deadfall after storms, and then disappear back into the trees. The town on the far side of the ridge mostly let him be. That was the bargain. He wouldn't drag his ghosts through their kitchens, and they wouldn't shine flashlights into his. He'd learned to live inside that bargain the way a man learns to live inside a scar. This morning's task was simple. Replace 2 broken posts. Restaple wire. Make the line straight again. Pretend straight lines in the world meant anything. Logan had already finished the first post when Hawk slowed, then stopped as if the snow itself had commanded it. Not dramatic, no bark, no growl, just stillness. One paw lifted mid-step, nose angled toward the stand of trees to the east where the land dipped into a shallow drainage. Logan felt the shift before he named it, the way a man feels a pressure change behind the ribs before a storm arrives. Hawk's breathing changed, subtle but unmistakable. Logan hated that change more than he hated the sound of gunfire in movies. Gunfire was obvious. This was the quiet before something decided whether you lived. Logan's gloved hand tightened around the staple hammer without thinking. "What is it?" he murmured, and heard how small his voice sounded in all that white. Hawk didn't look at him immediately. The dog was tasting the air, nostrils flaring once, then twice, drawing in information the way Logan used to draw maps in his head. Pine, cold iron, old oil from some long-dead machine. And then, something human that didn't belong in a morning like this. Fear. Fear had a smell. People who hadn't lived near violence thought fear was poetic. Logan knew it was practical. Fear was sweat trapped under clothing. Fear was breath that went shallow. Fear was skin turning sour. Logan had learned that overseas, under a sun that felt too close to the earth. Hawk had learned it beside him. They didn't imagine fear. They recognized it. Logan's first instinct rose fast and familiar. Turn away. Not because he was a coward, but because curiosity had a habit of opening doors that should stay shut. He'd paid the price of open doors before. His life now depended on closed ones. He took a step as if to pull Hawk back toward the fence line, toward the lie of normal work, toward the stove and the safety of solitude. Hawk didn't move. The dog's body was rigid in a way that wasn't panic. It was insistence. It was the posture of a partner reminding him of an older oath. If you smell the vulnerable, you don't pretend it's just weather. Logan swallowed and tasted cold air. His mind tried to bargain. It's probably a deer. It's probably a wounded animal. It's probably nothing. The forest made liars out of men who wanted peace. Hawk took one deliberate step toward the drainage and then looked back at Logan. There was no pleading in the dog's face, no drama, just a simple, brutal question. Are we leaving or are we standing? Logan felt something hot rise under his collar. Anger at the world for daring to need him again, and anger at himself for still being the kind of man who noticed. He had promised himself after the last mission and the dead radio and the friend who didn't come home that he would never go looking for trouble again. That promise had become a kind of religion. It kept him alive, but it also kept him alone, and sometimes, in the worst hours, he wondered if it kept him smaller than he deserved to be. "You always pick the worst days," Logan muttered to Hawk, the closest thing to humor he'd offered in weeks. Hawk's tail gave one restrained sweep. No joy, no play, just readiness. Logan followed. The snow under his boots packed with a quiet crunch, each step toward the drainage feeling like stepping into a story he didn't want to reread. The land dipped, brush thickened, and a fallen spruce lay half buried like a toppled spear. Hawk led him to the edge of the drainage and stopped again, nose hovering over disturbed snow. Logan crouched and brushed aside the top layer with his glove. Beneath the powder was a smear, thin, dark, already freezing. Not enough to paint a horror scene, just enough to whisper, there was contact here, and someone bled. Logan's jaw tightened. He looked for the obvious, tracks, footprints, the clean stamping of boots. Winter had tried to erase everything, but winter was a lazy editor. It left the important details if you knew where to look. A shallow groove cut through the snow, the kind made when something heavy is dragged with urgency and not much care for neatness. Logan followed the groove with his eyes until it disappeared into brush. Near the groove's start, caught on a thorny branch, was a strip of fabric. Dark navy, durable, the kind used for uniforms. Logan pinched it between 2 fingers and pulled it free. A small patch was stitched to it, half torn, but recognizable. Law enforcement. The sight made something in his chest go cold, because it turned, maybe, into someone. Hawk let out a quiet huff, then nudged Logan's knee as if urging him to keep reading the ground. Logan's mind tried to run through sensible explanations. A cop chasing a suspect. A deputy slipping in a storm. A training exercise gone wrong. But none of those explanations matched the smell Hawk had caught. Fear doesn't smell like a routine day. Fear smells like a person realizing the rules no longer apply. Logan's thumb brushed another mark in the snow, tiny specks of blood, spaced too far apart to be a steady drip. Not a slow walk. Not a casual stumble. More like a dragged body whose wounds only kissed the snow now and then. Alive, Logan whispered. And he didn't know if he was reassuring himself or making a vow. His gut pulled him toward the sensible option. Back out, go home, call someone, let the system do its job. But the system was a machine made of people, and people failed. Logan had seen good people fail because the wrong people were faster. He had also seen what happened when everyone waited for someone else to move first. He stared at the torn patch in his glove and felt the old war inside his bones stir like a dog waking in its kennel. It didn't roar. It didn't demand heroics. It simply stood up and watched. Logan could hear his own thoughts trying to negotiate with shame. I'm not a cop. I'm not on duty. I'm not anyone's savior. He was just a man with a broken fence and a dog and a life built out of silence. Yet the silence today felt like complicity. Hawk stepped forward again into the brush, moving carefully so the brittle branches wouldn't snap loud. Logan followed, heart tightening not with fear, but with the memory of pursuit. How the body becomes a tool, and the mind becomes a cold checklist. Observe, identify, assess, don't rush. The brush opened into a narrow corridor between 2 pines, and beyond it the forest thinned into a small clearing that shouldn't have been there. The snow lay smooth over it like a sheet over a body. Hawk stopped at the corridor's mouth, ears forward, head low. Logan lifted his gaze and felt his entire nervous system reorganize in one instant. In the center of the clearing stood a vertical shape painted white, too straight, too deliberate to be a tree. It rose from the snow like a warning finger, stark against the dark pines. Logan didn't move. For a heartbeat he couldn't, because whatever that white structure was, it didn't belong to nature, and men only put unnatural things in the woods when they want the woods to keep their secrets. The clearing looked too clean, the kind of clean winter uses to pretend nothing ugly has ever happened there. Snow lay flat and unbroken across the open space, reflecting the dim morning light back into Logan Pierce's eyes until everything felt overexposed, like the world wanted him to see and also wanted him to blink. He didn't blink. He stepped forward anyway, boots sinking with a soft, reluctant crunch, and he understood, before his mind could shape the words, that he had walked into something made by human hands, which meant it had a purpose, and purposes out here were rarely kind. The structure in the center of the clearing wasn't a tree and wasn't a trail marker. It was a cross, fresh-cut timber, squared at the edges, planted deep, braced with angled supports that disappeared under packed snow. Someone had painted it white, new paint, not weathered, still bright enough to look obscene against the dark pines. It stood upright with the confidence of a thing that expected obedience. Logan's first thought was absurd and automatic. Not a church, not a graveyard, not a memorial. Just a cross in the woods like a dare. Hawk stopped at Logan's left knee, body low, ears forward, breathing quiet but sharp. Logan could feel the dog's tension like static in the air. Hawk's gaze wasn't fixed on the cross itself. It flicked past it, scanning the tree line, reading for movement, for scent, for the small betrayals of snow that meant someone had been here recently. Logan forced himself to keep moving, but he did it the way he used to move on bad streets. Slow, angled, never straight at the threat, letting his eyes count exits and his ears catch the small sounds that mattered. As he closed the distance, the cross stopped being an object and became a message. Something was tied to it. At first it was only a shape, dark against white, bundled in winter clothing, hanging at a slant as if the cross had decided gravity was a toy. Then the shape shifted, barely, and the clearing tilted in Logan's perception because motion meant life. A woman was bound to the cross. Her arms were pulled back and secured so high her shoulders were forced into a cruel angle, wrists lashed with thick rope that had already rubbed the skin raw. Her boots hung several inches above the snow, toes pointed down, legs trembling from strain. A strip of duct tape sealed her mouth, frosted at the edges where her breath had condensed and frozen again. She was alive, but only just, and the kind of alive that could become not alive if the wind stayed mean another hour. Logan's throat tightened the way it did when something inside him wanted to roar, and he refused to let it. He stepped closer and took in details the way a medic takes in a patient. The woman looked early 30s, maybe 33, tall and athletic, built for long shifts and hard choices rather than showy strength. Even half-conscious, her posture carried a stubbornness that didn't belong to a victim who'd given up. Auburn hair, loose from a ponytail, clung to her cheek in damp strands, flecked with wind-driven snow. Freckles crossed the bridge of her nose, small, human, unfairly ordinary against the violence of the scene. There was a thin cut near her eyebrow, dried into a crescent, and bruising darkened the line of her jaw as if someone had tried to teach her a lesson with a fist. Her winter police jacket, dark navy, was still on her, but stripped of anything useful. No radio, no weapon, no obvious gear on the belt. Whoever did this hadn't been sloppy. They had been deliberate. Logan's eyes dropped to the base of the cross and found the sign, a rough plank of wood, nailed on crooked, with block letters scrawled in black paint. Property line. The words weren't a warning to trespassers. They were ownership. They were meant to say, this land answers to someone else now. Logan felt a flash of bitter humor. Of course it was a property line. Men who couldn't own their own conscience always tried to own ground instead. The woman's eyes opened as Logan's shadow fell across her face. Not wide, not panicked, steady. She looked at him like she was measuring whether he was real or a hallucination made by cold. Then her gaze flicked to Hawk, and something faint loosened in her expression, not relief exactly, but recognition. Working dogs were a language some people could read without speaking. She tried to say something through the tape. It came out as a muffled sound, more breath than voice. Hawk stepped closer, careful, nostrils flaring as he sampled her scent. Fear was there, yes, but so was grit, an iron taste of refusal. Hawk's tail stayed low, controlled. He did not jump. He did not whine. He stood like a guard posted to a duty he understood. Logan moved in, close enough now to see the rope fibers and how they bit into her wrists. His hands, gloved, hovered for a second because there was a part of him that still believed touching someone in pain meant inheriting it, but leaving her like this would be worse. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folding knife. Nothing dramatic, just a tool he used for cutting twine and trimming wire. The blade clicked open with a sound that felt too loud in the clearing. The woman's eyes tracked it. She didn't flinch. That steadiness hit Logan harder than a scream would have. "Easy," he whispered, not sure whether he was speaking to her, to Hawk, or to the part of himself that wanted to burn the cross down and hunt the men who built it. Hawk's ears twitched. Somewhere a crow called once, then fell silent. Logan placed one hand against the cross's vertical beam, feeling the fresh paint tacky under his glove. That paint was a time stamp. Whoever built this had been here recently. He angled the knife toward the duct tape first, not the ropes. Free the mouth, get words, get information. But the tape was stuck hard to skin, and he saw how her lips were cracked and pale under it. Ripping it off wrong could tear skin, start bleeding, send her body into shock. He hesitated, then chose the rope at her wrists instead. Support the weight. Cut clean. Don't let her drop. He reached up, braced his shoulder under her side as much as he could, and slipped the blade against the rope fibers. The rope was thick, cheap, and tight. It fought. Logan saw her eyes narrow, not from fear, from pain, because every tiny movement pulled at her shoulders like a slow dislocation. "I'm going to take your weight," he murmured. "You're going to breathe." The absurdity of giving someone instructions when they were literally hanging like a warning sign almost made him laugh. But humor was survival too. It kept the mind from breaking under what the eyes had to see. He cut through the first loop. The rope snapped loose a fraction. Her body sagged into him, heavier than he expected because exhaustion has weight. Logan tightened his grip and adjusted, boots slipping slightly in the snow. Hawk shifted closer, placing his body against Logan's shin like an anchor, sharing stability the way dogs do, without asking permission, without needing praise. Logan saw the second rope loop and started sawing through it with controlled strokes. The woman's breathing came in short bursts through her nose. Her eyes watered, but she didn't sob. She didn't beg. She looked at Logan as if he were a problem she was trying to solve. That look, professional, measuring, refusing to be small, told Logan who she was before she said a word. Officer. Not a title. A temperament. The second rope began to fray. Logan's mind counted seconds, not because he was rushing, but because something in the quiet felt wrong. The clearing was too still. Even the wind sounded muffled, as if the trees were holding their breath. Hawk's head lifted abruptly, nose turning toward the tree line to the north. His hackles rose a fraction along his shoulders. He made no sound, but his body language sharpened like a blade being drawn. Logan froze mid-cut. The woman's eyes flicked past Logan's shoulder, following Hawk's attention, and something flashed there. Warning. Logan felt it too, not as a thought, but as a pressure change behind his ribs. Somewhere beyond the trees, snow shifted. A branch creaked, slow and deliberate, not the careless creak of wind. Logan's war memory tried to surface. He pushed it down and listened with the part of himself that had once lived by listening. Another faint sound, the soft crunch of boots, spaced out, cautious. Not one person wandering. More than one. Logan kept his face still, but inside him the old calculations began to unfold. If there are watchers, they placed her here as bait. If she's bait, they expect a rescuer, which means they're close enough to respond. Logan looked at the rope in his hand, almost cut through. He could finish in 2 seconds. He could also get shot in those 2 seconds if someone in the trees had a line of sight. He didn't see anyone. That was worse. Men who wanted to be seen made noise. Men who wanted to own you moved quiet. Hawk let out the softest sound Logan had ever heard from him, a low, restrained rumble deep in the chest, so small it could have been mistaken for the forest settling. It wasn't meant to scare. It was meant to inform Logan, someone is there, close. Logan didn't turn his head fully. Turning your head was how you showed someone where your throat lived. He kept his eyes on the rope, but shifted his gaze slightly, scanning the perimeter through the corner of his vision. Pine trunks, shadow, snow. A gap between two cedars that looked darker than it should. Logan's pulse narrowed, not racing, focusing. He leaned closer to the woman, mouth near her ear, voice so low it barely existed. "If I cut you down, can you move?" The woman blinked once, then nodded, small, controlled. Then she shook her head slightly, like she was telling him something else. Not fast. Not far. She tried to speak through the tape again, a muffled phrase that sounded like, "Don't town." Logan didn't fully understand, but he understood the shape of it. Don't go where they expect. Don't go where the system lives. Logan's knife finished the last fibers. The rope gave way. He caught her fully, arms straining, and lowered her toward the snow with a slow, careful descent. Her boots hit the ground, knees buckled instantly, and Logan half-carried, half-guided her into a crouch behind the cross's vertical beam, using it as the only cover in an open clearing. Hawk moved with them, positioning his body between the tree line and the woman as if he could physically block bullets with fur. Logan pressed his gloved hand gently to the woman's shoulder to steady her. Her body shook violently now, not from fear, from cold and shock catching up. She lifted her face to him, eyes bright with pain and the stubborn refusal to die on someone else's schedule. Logan's gaze flicked once more to the property line sign, and a bitter thought landed with the weight of truth. This cross wasn't about faith. It was about territory, and someone out there was enforcing it. Hawk's rumble deepened by a hair, still restrained, still barely audible, but the message was unmistakable. The Watchers were not leaving. They were waiting for the next move. Logan tightened his grip on the knife, and in the thin, bright silence of the clearing, he felt his old life step closer, like a ghost putting a hand on his shoulder and whispering, "You're in it now." Snow drifted sideways through the pines, and the clearing felt like a stage built for cruelty, bright enough to be seen and quiet enough to swallow screams. Logan Pierce stayed low behind the white-painted cross, one hand braced on the beam, the other still holding his small knife like it was a promise he didn't want to make. Natalie Brooks was down now, but not safe. She was crouched in the snow with her back against the cross's vertical post, shoulders shaking so hard the tremors traveled into the wood. Her duct-taped mouth and bound wrists made her look like a warning sign that had learned to breathe, and Logan could feel the Watchers in the trees the way you feel a storm before you see it. Pressure, presence, intent. Hawk stood between Natalie and the tree line, body angled outward, ears set forward like antennae tuned to danger. He didn't bark. He didn't charge. He waited, and that waiting was the most terrifying kind of intelligence. Logan's mind ran through options with brutal clarity. If he lifted Natalie and bolted, they'd be silhouettes in an open clearing, easy targets, easy trophies. If he stayed too long, the Watchers would close distance, and the cross would become a killing ground. He needed misdirection, not heroics. The forest was full of objects, sounds, lies. He could use them. Logan eased his gaze across the clearing without turning his head fully. On the far left edge, half buried in snow, sat a rusted metal drum tipped on its side near old scrap. Remnants from a long-forgotten logging outfit. The kind of junk people left when they believed wilderness would erase their sins. Behind that drum, the trees thickened into shadow. If the Watchers were human, their eyes would be trained on the cross. If the Watchers were disciplined, they'd be scanning edges. Either way, a sudden sound away from the cross would pull attention for a second because humans were wired to chase noise, like dogs were wired to chase scent. Logan's glove slid slowly along the snow until his fingers closed around a pebble-sized chunk of frozen dirt and gravel. He didn't look at it. He didn't shift his shoulders. He just let the small weight settle into his palm and waited for the right moment. The moment the wind gusted, the moment the trees sighed, the moment nature made enough noise to hide the start of his lie. Then he flicked his wrist and sent the chunk of gravel skipping low across the snow toward the rusted drum. It struck with a sharp metallic ring, bright and ugly, the kind of sound that made the forest flinch. Somewhere in the tree line, a faint rustle answered, boots repositioning, not running, but adjusting. Logan felt it like a pulse. Hawk's ears twitched toward the left, not because he was fooled, because he was measuring the reaction. Logan used the beat of distraction to move. He leaned into Natalie, close enough that she could feel his breath through her hair, and whispered, "Hold still." His voice was low, steady, the voice of a man who had learned that calm was a weapon. Natalie's eyes cut to him, furious with pain and cold, but she didn't fight him. That told Logan something important. She was hurt, but her mind was intact. That was rare after being used as a message. Logan slid his knife to the duct tape and lifted a corner carefully, using the blade to separate adhesive from skin in small, controlled motions. The tape came away slowly, pulling at cracked lips and frost-stiff edges. Natalie sucked in a breath that sounded like a suppressed sob, more oxygen than emotion. Her lips were pale, her teeth chattered, but her gaze stayed sharp, tracking the tree line even as her body tried to shake itself apart. Logan didn't ask questions yet. Questions were loud. He focused on function. He cut the rope, binding her wrists, but he didn't let her arms snap free too fast. He supported her forearms as the tension released, so her shoulders didn't scream into dislocation. She winced, a sound like a breath bitten in half, and Logan felt something hot flicker behind his sternum, rage, old and familiar. But he kept it caged. Hawk shifted again, silent, slipping along the cross's shadow and then into the thin line of brush on the right. Logan didn't command him. Hawk didn't need commands for this kind of work. He moved the way an experienced partner moved, not to fight, but to shape the room. A soft scrape came from the right, metal dragged against metal, then a heavier clatter as something toppled. The noise wasn't random. Hawk had found another piece of scrap hidden under snow, an old sheet of corrugated metal maybe, or a bent toolbox, something that could fall loudly and steal eyes. In the tree line, Logan heard the smallest shift, the faintest exhale, the almost inaudible sign of attention redirecting. 2 beats of time, maybe 3. Logan took them like currency. He slid his arm under Natalie's shoulders and lifted her just enough to move her without making her stand. Her legs were stiff and uncooperative, boots half frozen, and she hissed through her teeth as pain flared in her shoulder joints. Logan didn't apologize. Apologies were soft. Softness got you killed. He simply moved her, careful and fast, dragging her backward into the deeper shadow behind the cross and then toward the nearest line of pines where darkness pooled thick. Hawk reappeared at Logan's side like a shadow returning to its owner, body low, eyes fixed on the tree line as if he could see through bark and snow. Logan used the trees like a curtain. He pulled Natalie into the first pocket of shadow under low branches heavy with snow, then kept moving, taking them another 10 yards, then another, never in a straight line. Natalie's breaths came ragged now, not from panic, but from the cruel math of cold and pain. Logan stopped behind a thick trunk and crouched, using his body to block her from the clearing. Then he reached into the back of his jacket and pulled out a folded emergency blanket, silver and crinkled, cheap and miraculous. He'd carried it for years the way some men carried prayers, not because they expected rescue, but because they had seen too many nights when rescue didn't come. He wrapped it around Natalie's shoulders, tucking it tight, forcing warmth to stay where her body could use it. The blanket crackled softly, a sound that felt enormous in the hush. Hawk's head snapped toward it, then relaxed when he realized it was only a tool. Logan leaned close. "Look at me," he whispered. Natalie's eyes found his. They were hazel green under the grime, flecked with gold near the pupil. Eyes that had likely seen too many domestic calls, too many drunk lies, too many moments where procedure was all that stood between civilization and teeth. Her freckles looked darker now, against skin drained pale by cold. She swallowed hard. "Don't!" she rasped, voice raw from tape and freezing air. Her words came like she had to cut them out of herself. "Don't take me back to town." Logan's jaw tightened. The sentence was not a request. It was a warning delivered with what little strength she had left. "Why?" Logan asked, but he kept the question small, as if asking it too loudly would summon the answer. Natalie's laugh was bitter and short, more breath than humor. "Because town already knows," she said, and her voice sharpened on the last word like a blade being drawn. "They didn't just dump me out here." Her eyes flicked toward the clearing they'd left behind. "They marked me." Logan felt cold settle deeper inside him. "They?" Natalie's lips trembled, not fear, anger. "Men with radios, men who called themselves line keepers." She tried to swallow again, and pain made her eyes water. "They said I crossed a boundary, asked too many questions, found something I wasn't supposed to." Logan's mind tried to build a picture without knowing the pieces. Line keepers, property line, cross. It wasn't a ritual, it was enforcement. A private border laid over public land like a lie painted white. Hawk shifted, nose lifting, reading the wind. Logan heard it too now, faint movement near the clearing. Not running, not sloppy. Someone was repositioning, creeping closer to confirm whether their bait had been taken. Logan tightened the emergency blanket around Natalie and pressed a finger to his lips. Natalie nodded once, understanding instantly. Even injured, she still had discipline. That discipline made Logan's chest ache, in a way he didn't like. It reminded him of the parts of himself he had buried because they hurt too much to keep alive. They moved again, deeper into the trees, using the thickest cover, stepping where branches would hide their tracks. Logan kept one hand on Natalie's elbow, guiding her, letting her lean without letting her fall. Hawk ran point, then doubled back, then angled off again, drawing a loose triangle around them as if mapping invisible threats. After a minute, Logan stopped and looked back through the lattice of trunks. The clearing was partially visible now, the cross a pale slash against dark. But it wasn't alone. Logan's breath caught, not because of what he saw first, but because of what he saw second. Beyond the clearing, deeper in the woods, at least two more vertical shapes rose faintly between the trees. White, straight. Too deliberate. They were farther apart, half hidden, but unmistakable once the mind recognized the pattern. More crosses. Not close enough to be part of one display, but aligned in a way that suggested intention. Like markers. Like a grid. Like a system. Logan felt his stomach tighten, the way it used to tighten when he realized he wasn't in a single incident. He was in a network. Natalie saw his face change and followed his gaze. Her expression went hard, not surprised. "It's not just me," she whispered. Her voice carried grief and fury braided tight. "It's their boundary." Hawk let out the softest growl again, low, restrained, aimed into the darkness behind them. The watchers were still there. And now Logan understood the worst part. The cross in the clearing hadn't been a singular cruelty. It had been a signpost on a map someone had been drawing through the forest for a long time. Logan tightened his grip on his knife and pulled Natalie closer into the shadow. And in that moment, the rescue stopped being a rescue and became an invasion. The wind found them before safety did. It slid between tree trunks like a thief with cold fingers, tugging at Natalie's emergency blanket until it crackled and threatened to betray their position. Logan Pierce didn't fight the wind. He negotiated with the land, the way he'd learned to negotiate with chaos, choose terrain that doesn't argue. Hawk led them off the shallow gully and into a cluster of boulders that rose from the hillside like the broken spine of something ancient. The rocks were dark with frozen seepage, slick in places, and half buried where snow had drifted deep. To anyone passing at a distance, it looked like nothing, just more winter. To Logan, it looked like shelter. He found the hollow the way a man finds a memory he has visited too many times. A narrow seam between two slabs, hidden by dead brush and a curtain of low pine branches. He pulled the brush aside with gloved hands, careful to keep the motion small, and eased Natalie down into the opening. Hawk slipped in after her, shoulders lowering automatically to fit the space, black coat catching a dusting of snow that melted into tiny beads against his fur. Logan went last, because last was where ambush liked to live. Inside, the air changed. Not warm, winter still owned the world, but calmer. The wind couldn't claw as hard. Sound couldn't travel as far. The hollow widened into a cramped chamber, just big enough for 3 bodies and 2 choices: breathe quietly or panic loudly. Logan crouched beside Natalie, eyes adjusting to the dim. He could see the tremor in her hands now that the immediate sprint had ended. Her wrists were raw, rope burns angry red against pale skin. Her cheeks were blotched with cold. Her auburn hair had frozen in messy strands along her temples, making her look younger than she was, until her eyes cut toward the entrance with that steady, law enforcement focus that made her look older again. Pain lived in her shoulders, and Logan could read it in the way she refused to lift her arms higher than necessary. She wasn't dramatic about it. She was professional. Professionals saved their worst faces for later. Logan kept his voice low. "Any bleeding?" Natalie shook her head once. "Not much," she rasped. Her throat sounded scraped raw, as if the duct tape had taken a layer of dignity with it. She swallowed, then forced air into her lungs in slow counts, the way someone trained themselves to do when fear tried to seize the steering wheel. Logan took out a small antiseptic wipe and cleaned the rope burns without ceremony. He didn't apologize for the sting. He simply did the work. Hawk sat near the entrance, body angled outward, ears twitching at every small shift of the forest. He didn't look frightened. He looked offended, like danger was an insult he'd been dealing with his whole life and was tired of hearing the same joke. Natalie's gaze kept drifting back to Hawk, as if the dog's presence was the only honest thing in a world that had suddenly become made of lies. Logan finished wrapping her wrists with gauze and tape, then checked her jacket. The navy fabric had been rubbed raw at the shoulders where the ropes had cinched. Her duty belt was still there, but stripped. No radio, no weapon, no handcuffs. Somebody had wanted her alive and helpless. Somebody had wanted time. Hawk shifted suddenly, nose lowering, muzzle pressing against Natalie's jacket near her left side. He inhaled once, sharply, then pawed at the fabric with careful insistence. Not frantic, not playful, purposeful. Logan's hand moved to the dog's collar reflexively, then stopped. Hawk wasn't chasing a smell. He was finding something that didn't belong. "What is it, boy?" Logan murmured, voice barely a thread. Hawk didn't answer with sound. He answered with teeth. He caught a small fold of fabric between his front teeth and tugged gently, pulling the jacket outward as if he were retrieving a hidden note from a pocket. Something beneath the jacket lining resisted, then gave. A tiny object slid into view, flat, black, no bigger than a matchbox, sealed with tape like it had been attached in a hurry. A beacon! Logan's stomach tightened. He didn't need to see a screen to understand what it meant. It was a tracker, and it had been riding Natalie like a silent leash. Natalie stared at it, and for a second her face went blank, in the way a person's face goes blank when a truth lands too heavy to process. "I didn't," she began, then stopped because denial was useless. Logan didn't waste words. He peeled back the tape and found the device fixed beneath the fabric. No blinking light, subtle, professional. Whoever planted it wanted it to be missed until it wasn't. Natalie's breath hitched. "They tagged me," she whispered, and the sentence sounded like humiliation. "So anyone who touched me." Logan nodded once. He powered the beacon down with a firm press, then wrapped it back in tape, not to hide it, but to keep it from waking again by accident. His mind moved ahead, already building the next lie. Turning it off wasn't enough. If the men out there were tracking signals, they would notice the silence. Predators noticed when their prey stopped leaving scent. He needed the beacon to keep talking, just not from where they were. Logan slid toward the hollow's mouth and listened. The forest beyond was muted, but not empty. Somewhere in the distance, faint through wind and trees, an engine throbbed, not close enough to see lights, close enough to remind Logan that machines could sniff trails as well as dogs could. He looked down the slope and spotted a narrow drainage line, an old runoff channel that curved away toward the east. It would funnel sound. It would also funnel attention. Logan's jaw set. He waited for a gust, then flicked the beacon hard, sending it skittering down the icy drainage like a black beetle fleeing into shadow. It bounced once off rock, clicked against frozen debris, and disappeared. Hawk's ears lifted. Natalie watched Logan with a kind of stunned gratitude mixed with rage. Gratitude for the competence, rage for the need of it. Logan didn't speak. He held up one finger. Wait. Minutes passed with the slow cruelty of cold. Then the distant engine pitch changed. The sound, which had been holding steady like a threat on a string, shifted direction, moved away from them, toward the drainage, like a beast catching a different scent. Natalie's eyes widened. She didn't celebrate. She looked sick. "They were tracking it," she whispered, voice barely there. Logan's expression stayed controlled, but inside him something hardened. "Yeah," he said softly. "They wanted to be led." Natalie's mouth trembled, not from cold this time, from the weight of realization. She leaned her head back against the stone and shut her eyes for half a second, as if bracing for a memory she didn't want to replay. When she opened them again, her stare was clearer, sharper, and older. "They didn't hang me there to kill me," she said. The words came out like she was swallowing glass. "If they wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. The cross was bait." Logan didn't contradict her. He had seen bait before, in other countries, in other winters, with different uniforms. Bait didn't scream forever. Bait existed long enough to lure something bigger into the net. Natalie drew a breath, steadying herself. "When you cut me down," she continued, "you didn't just rescue me. You stepped over their line." She glanced at Hawk. "And they'll follow the rescuer. That's the point." The hollow felt smaller as those words settled. Outside, the engine noise faded farther, chasing the beacon's false trail. Logan knew it would come back eventually, once they realized the scent was wrong. They would come back angry, and anger made men sloppy, but it also made them fast. Natalie's voice dropped even lower, as if she feared the forest itself might overhear. "I kept thinking it was some twisted intimidation," she said, "a warning to me, but it's bigger, it's a system." Her eyes flicked toward the direction of the clearing where Logan had seen the other white shapes between trees. "Those crosses, they're not random." Logan's gaze sharpened. "What are they?" Natalie hesitated, like the answer might curse them if spoken. Then she said it anyway, because truth was a duty she still took seriously, even when it hurt. "Cross marks," she whispered. The word sounded like a brand name, which made it more chilling. "That's what I heard them call it. Not church, not religion. Crossmark." Logan felt a bitter flash of humor. Of course they gave it a neat name. Evil loved branding. It made cruelty feel organized, almost respectable. Natalie went on, voice shaking now with a mix of fury and shame. "I was investigating missing supplies, people who vanished off county roads. Strange deliveries, always near private lines, always near old logging routes. I thought it was stolen equipment. Then I found a ledger, photographs, coordinates, and every coordinate was near one of those crosses. She swallowed. They told me the cross is where handoffs happen, like a drop point, a signal. They said it's how they mark the route through the forest. Logan's mind clicked into a shape that fit too well. A network of markers. A grid. A system that turned wilderness into a corridor. And a woman hung on a white cross to draw the one kind of man who would step into it. A rescuer with nowhere else to go. Hawk let out a soft huff that sounded almost like disgust. Natalie looked at the dog and managed a weak, bitter half-smile. The humor was small, but it was oxygen. "Even he hates that word," she whispered. Logan's mouth twitched once, not quite a smile, but close enough to prove he was still human. Then his face sobered. "If Crossmark is a route," he said, "then someone owns the route." Natalie's eyes hardened. "And someone in town protects it," she answered. The old warning returned, sharper now. "Don't take me back." Logan listened again. The engine was gone in the wrong direction, good for now. But the hollow wouldn't hold them forever. He glanced at Natalie's taped wrists, her stiff shoulders, her trembling knees. "Can you move?" he asked. Natalie inhaled, grimaced, and nodded. "Not fast," she admitted, "but I can." Logan accepted that. Necessary was all anyone ever had. Hawk shifted closer to Natalie, pressing his shoulder briefly against her shin like a quiet pledge. "You're not alone, even if your world just cracked." Natalie's gaze softened for a heartbeat, then returned to steel. "They'll realize the beacon's gone," she whispered. "They'll widen the search." Logan nodded once. "Then we don't stay where they expect," he said. And as he spoke, he realized the irony that would have been funny if it weren't deadly. The cross hadn't been meant to kill her. It had been meant to recruit him into the story. And now that he knew the name of the story, he could stop reading it like a victim and start editing it like a man who understood terrain, timing, and lies. Natalie Brooks spoke the way a good cop spoke when the world stopped being a story and turned into evidence. Short, clean. No drama unless it served the truth. In the rock hollow, her breath still came in visible threads, but her voice had steadied into that clipped field report cadence that kept fear from turning into noise. Logan Pierce crouched opposite her, back to stone. Worn brown leather jacket darkened at the seams with melted snow, red and black plaid showing at the collar. Like a stubborn flag, he refused to retire. Hawk held the entrance like a living gate. German Shepherd, 8 years old, black and tan coated, dusted with white, muzzle graying just enough to look wise rather than old, ears flicking whenever the forest exhaled wrong. Natalie kept her hands close to her body, wrists bandaged, shoulders tight from the hanging. Every movement looked like it cost her something, yet she paid it without complaint. "Multiple missing persons," she began, eyes on Logan, then briefly on Hawk, as if the dog's attention was a calming metronome. Not hikers who got turned around, not hunters who broke an ankle and froze. Patterns. Logan didn't interrupt. He could feel the shape of her words before she finished them. A map drawn in disappearance. Natalie continued, the way a surgeon continued when the cut was already open. The last pings, when we had them, clustered near the forest edge, along old service routes, logging spurs, utility cuts, places the county doesn't patrol because everyone assumes nobody's out there in winter. She paused to swallow, jaw flexing against pain. But someone is out there. Someone organized. Logan's gaze stayed steady, but inside him something tightened. The old part that recognized logistics as a kind of violence. Natalie angled her chin toward the direction of the clearing, toward those white vertical lines Logan had glimpsed between trunks. "They use crosses," she said. "Wood, painted white, because snow hides everything else. Tape on trees gets buried. Stakes disappear. Spray paint fades. But a white cross? Even in a storm, people see it." Hawk's nose lifted, as if offended by the practicality of evil. Natalie's mouth twitched, humor trying to breathe. "It's a marker that doesn't care about weather," she added. "And it does another thing." Logan waited. Natalie looked down at her bandaged wrists like she could still feel the rope's message in her skin. "People avoid crosses," she said quietly. "Even the ones who don't believe in God still get weird about them. They think it's a memorial, a warning, a shrine. They don't want bad luck. They don't want to disrespect someone's grief, so they give it distance." She lifted her eyes, and they were hard now, ashamed and furious at the same time. That distance is security for smugglers. The cross becomes a fence without barbed wire. Logan felt cold move through him that had nothing to do with wind. "Smugglers of what?" he asked. Natalie's shoulders rose and fell once, like her body wanted to shrug but couldn't afford it. "Could be drugs, weapons, cash, could be people," she said, and that last word landed heavier than the others. "I don't have proof of the cargo yet. I have proof of the route. I was building it." Logan's eyes narrowed. "How?" Natalie exhaled slowly, forcing herself into sequence. "A tip came in about an old fire lookout being used at night," she said. "The Pine Ridge station, decommissioned, no official traffic. But locals kept seeing lights up there, faint, like someone was signaling or working." She spoke as if reading off a report she'd written in her head to keep herself from shaking apart. "I checked it alone," she admitted, and the admission sounded like self-disgust. "Not because I'm reckless, because I didn't trust who would show up if I called it in. Too many leaks, too many lost reports." Logan didn't ask why she suspected leaks yet. He could hear it in her tone, the way faith had already cracked. Natalie continued. "I found fresh tire tracks where there shouldn't be any. Snow should have erased them. But the cold had sealed them like a fingerprint. A truck had gone up and down within hours." She closed her eyes for a beat, remembering. When she opened them, the memory sharpened her voice. Inside the lookout, there was a ledger, not names, codes, times, short entries, cross symbol beside certain lines, and coordinates written in a way that looked like hiking notes but didn't match any marked trails. Logan's mind clicked again. Crossmark, not a symbol of belief, a symbol of transfer. Natalie's lips tightened. "I took photos," she said. "Then I heard boots on the stairs, more than one set, controlled, no panic, people who knew the building." Hawk's body stiffened slightly, as if the past tense sounded too much like the present. Natalie's gaze flicked to the entrance and back. "I didn't make it out. They came in fast, quiet. One of them grabbed my shoulder, right here," she said, nodding to the joint that still looked ready to scream. "Another took my phone. They didn't beat me like they wanted revenge. They handled me like inventory." Logan felt his hand curl against his knee. Natalie saw it and kept going anyway, because pity didn't help. "They dragged me down the ridge," she said. "I fought. I landed a good elbow on someone's ribs. I remember because he grunted like a man surprised pain still worked. Then something hit the back of my head. Not hard enough to kill, hard enough to blur time." She took a careful breath. "When I woke, I was at the cross." Logan's jaw set. "The one in the clearing," Natalie nodded. "They tied me up there like a sign. They painted it fresh, white so bright it didn't belong to the forest. And they put that board at the base, property line." Her laugh came out dry and bitter. "It wasn't religion. It was ownership." Logan's eyes stayed on her face, on the freckles across her nose that looked like scattered ash in the dim. They wanted a rescuer, he said, not a question. Natalie's stare hardened in agreement. Exactly, she replied. They didn't want me dead fast. Dead is quiet. Dead is simple. They wanted me alive long enough to pull someone into the root. She swallowed, the truth tasting like rust. Whoever comes to cut me down becomes the next moving dot, the next lead, the next proof that someone still believes in doing the right thing. Hawk made a soft sound in his throat. Not a bark, not a growl, more like a low, disgusted breath. Logan almost smiled at the timing, then didn't, because humor here was a thin blanket, and the cold was greedy. Natalie leaned forward a fraction, as if urgency could warm her bones. Crossmark, she whispered again, slower this time. That's what they called it, like a shipping label. Logan's gaze drifted to the shadowed entrance. So the crosses form a corridor, he said. A route through snow. Natalie nodded. A route that looks like superstition from a distance, she said, which is perfect camouflage. Logan felt something old stir, the battlefield instinct that hated clever cruelty most of all. It wasn't the violence that shook him. It was the craft. People who could build systems like this could do worse than hang a woman on a cross. Natalie watched his face, reading him the way he had read her. You weren't supposed to find me, she said quietly. It was supposed to be someone from town, someone predictable, someone who'd call it in. Logan's mouth tightened. But you said don't take you back, he reminded her. Natalie's eyes flashed. Because the route touches town, she said, and the men who set this up, they talk like they're protected. She hesitated, then spoke anyway. At the lookout, before I went down, I heard one of them say, "No one's coming. Dispatch is ours." Logan felt a slow burn in his chest. He had met corruption before. It wore different uniforms, spoke different languages, but it always smelled the same, certainty. Natalie's voice dropped. They kept saying linekeepers, she added, like it was a job title, like they were proud. Logan's eyes moved to Hawk. The dog's ears were forward now, posture locked, breathing shallow. Not fear. Contact. The forest had shifted again, the way it shifted when men stepped into it. Logan held up one hand. Still. Natalie froze, swallowing her next words. They listened. At first there was only wind whispering through pine needles. Then, faint but distinct, a crackle, radio static, clipped and brief, the kind of sound that didn't belong to nature. A voice rode the static, too far to catch the words, but close enough to know it was human and coordinated. Hawk's head turned slightly, tracking. Then came the second signal, the soft, rhythmic crunch of footsteps on packed snow. Not many, not a mob, a small team, enough to kill quietly. Logan looked at Natalie, and in that glance was the grim understanding that her report wasn't just history. It was a live feed. The Crossmark route had felt the tug of a rescuer, and now the route was answering. The radio hiss came again, faint as a snake in dry grass, and then the snow answered with footsteps, measured, patient, too close for comfort. Logan Pierce didn't lunge for heroics or sprint for the tree line like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. He moved like someone who knew winter kept receipts. A straight run in fresh snow was a confession written in white ink, readable from a mile away. He lifted 2 fingers to Hawk, silent, close, and the old German shepherd flowed to his knee, 8 years of discipline in the way the dog's paws found quiet ground even on crusted drifts. Natalie Brooks pushed herself up from the stones, jaw tight against pain, shoulders stiff from the hanging. The bandaged wrists held close to her chest as if her body was still remembering ropes. Her eyes tracked Logan's hands more than his face. She trusted motions now, not speeches. Logan eased out of the rock hollow last, the way a man exits a burning room, backward, watching, refusing to gift the dark a surprise. He dragged a thin curtain of brush back into place, not to hide perfectly, just to make the entrance look like nothing important, because nothing important was exactly what predators ignored. The footsteps outside paused, and Logan felt the pause like a held breath. He led them down slope toward the frozen creek bed he'd memorized over months of solitude, a narrow vein of ice that ran beneath the pines like the forest's own secret road. Water, when it wasn't fully dead, broke tracks, softened sound, stole certainty. Hawk went first, head low, ears pivoting, choosing footholds like a monk choosing words for a prayer. Careful, exact, no wasted syllables. Logan followed in Hawk's rhythm, placing boots where ice was thicker, where stones gave grip, where a misstep wouldn't crack like a gunshot. Natalie came third, diesel-less and alone in this version of the world, but not helpless. She kept moving, each breath a small argument with hypothermia, each step a refusal to become a story with a memorial attached. The creek corridor narrowed between brittle brush and boulders. Logan's breath came slow and controlled, but inside him the old war stirred, not loud, not cinematic, just that cold mental arithmetic that never truly retired. Distance, angles, sound, time. Behind them, the radio murmured once more, a clipped burst, then silence. And still the sense remained. The pursuit was not guessing. It was receiving. Natalie's voice came out thin, but sharp enough to cut through the creek's hush. "They're matching us," she whispered. Logan didn't answer at first. He listened. No branches snapping in random animal rhythm. No deer scatter. Instead, a disciplined cadence, too regular to be luck, too steady to be fear. Hawk stopped suddenly, not dramatic, just a lift of one paw and a subtle change in breathing. Logan felt it in his ribs before he saw it. Someone ahead, close, tucked into the trees where the creek bent. Logan crouched, one palm down, hold, and Natalie froze beside him, swallowing her breath as if even oxygen was too loud. Hawk's muzzle twitched, catching a human scent that wasn't campfire or coffee. It was sweat cooled by arrogance. Logan slid one hand into his jacket, fingers closing around the small knife he carried not for show, but for moments when the world demanded hard honesty. Then he didn't draw it. Not yet. He chose another tool first, patience. A figure moved along the creek's edge, male, mid to late 20s, lean rather than strong, wearing a dark insulated jacket and cheap snow camo that tried too hard, the hood pulled tight like he wanted to erase his own face. He carried a handheld radio and walked with the careful steps of someone told to look, not fight. A scout. A listener. Logan waited until the man turned his head to check the bend behind him, then rose like a shadow unhooking itself from stone. Hawk didn't bark. Hawk didn't charge. The dog simply appeared behind the scout's legs with that quiet inevitability working dogs had, a presence that made the air heavier. The scout spun, startled, and his boot slid on ice. Just enough. Logan closed the gap in a single, controlled motion, one hand clamping the man's wrist, the other catching the radio strap before it could swing and smack plastic against rock. The scout's breath hitched and he tried to raise his free hand. Hawk's teeth flashed, not biting, just promising, and the man's courage folded like wet paper. "Don't," Logan murmured, voice calm in a way that felt cruel to a panicking mind. "You make noise, you die. You stay quiet, you live." The scout's eyes widened, reflecting the pale winter light, and Logan saw what he'd seen overseas 1,000 times. Not evil, not bravery, just a man caught between orders and consequence. Logan guided him down onto the creek bank, knee pressing into snow for leverage, twisting the scout's arm behind his back with enough pressure to control, not to break. Natalie stepped close, face pale, freckles stark against cold skin, her gaze hard with the kind of focus built from nights when help didn't come. "Who sent you?" she whispered. The scout swallowed, lips trembling. I'm just watching," he stammered. Logan pulled a zip tie from his pocket, one of the practical things men carried when they preferred problems to stay solved, and cinched the scout's wrists tight. Hawk stood beside them like a statue carved out of loyalty, ears forward, listening for the rest of the pack. Logan took the radio from the scout's gloved hand and turned it down, not off. Off was a statement. Down was a trap. The scout's name, when it finally spilled out, was Evan Hart, small-town common, forgettable, the kind of name that didn't sound like a villain until it did. He was thin-faced with a patchy beard that couldn't decide whether to commit, and eyes that kept darting to the trees as if expecting the forest itself to judge him. "Evan," Natalie said, voice cold and even, "you've been tracking us since the cross." Evan flinched at the word cross like it burned. I don't touch them," he insisted too fast. "I just report movement. That's it, that's all." Logan studied him, and in that study there was a weary sadness because systems didn't run on monsters alone. They ran on men who kept telling themselves their piece was small. "Who do you report to?" Logan asked. Evan's mouth opened, then shut. The creek seemed to hold its breath with him. Behind them, far off, a faint crackle hinted at others adjusting their line. Logan leaned closer, not threatening, just present. "They hung a cop on a white cross," he said softly. "Your job helped that happen." Evan's throat bobbed. He looked at Hawk, and something in his face shifted, shame or fear, hard to tell. "I didn't know it was her," he whispered. "They said it was a marker, a warning." Natalie's laugh came out once, short, humorless. "That's what you tell yourself so you can sleep," she said. Logan didn't press further yet, because the forest was still alive with danger. He gestured down the creek. "We move," he told Natalie, then to Hawk. "Front." Hawk went instantly, scanning ahead. Logan hauled Evan to his feet and shoved him toward a tight cluster of saplings off the creek line, a place where branches hung low and snow drifted deep enough to swallow a body from casual view. He forced Evan to kneel and tied him to a trunk with paracord, fast and neat. "If you yell," Logan said, "you freeze with your mouth open." Evan nodded so hard it looked painful. Logan returned to Natalie, and they moved again, using the creek for another quarter-mile before cutting into thicker cover, where fallen timber made broken corridors. Still, that impossible precision haunted them. The way engines had started ahead earlier, the way footsteps had arrived on time, the way men found them like hounds with a map. Natalie kept walking until she couldn't keep the question inside. "It's not just footprints," she said. "They're moving like they have eyes." Logan's gaze stayed forward. "Then someone's feeding them," he replied. Natalie hesitated, then reached for a memory, like a file pulled from a locked drawer. "There's a guy," she said, "near the edge of the forest. Not in town, not really. He fixes things nobody else wants. Old repeaters, abandoned relay boxes. He's the only one with the tools and the know-how." Logan glanced at her once. "Name." "Eddie Knox," Natalie said, and the name landed with weight. She spoke faster now, because fear loved silence and she refused to feed it. "Mid-30s. Tall, stringy build, always looks underslept like his bones never learned rest. Brown hair shaved close on the sides, longer on top, like he cuts it himself with impatience. Grease under the nails. Skin pale, from living under fluorescent shop lights. He's polite in that cautious way, like kindness costs him something, like he's always braced for people to assume the worst." Logan didn't interrupt. Natalie continued, voice tightening with reluctant logic. "His father worked county maintenance. died in a winter accident. Line truck slid off an iced road. After that, Eddie started treating signal towers like religion. Keeps saying, if the line's dead, people die. He fixes broken coverage because he thinks he's saving lives. But a man like that could also reroute things. Mirror pings. Wake up equipment that's supposed to be asleep. Logan felt a slow anger rise, not aimed at Eddie yet, but at the way a good intention could be bent into a leash. A normal tech can't make pursuit that precise, Natalie said, almost to herself. Not unless he's part of the system, or unless someone's using his work. Hawk stopped again. Logan raised a fist. They froze behind a fallen log as another radio burst crackled closer now, clearer, like the forest had leaned in to eavesdrop. Logan lifted the stolen handheld and listened. Static, then a voice, calm, bored, authoritative, in the way some men sounded when they believed consequences were for other people. "Surveyor says move the line," the voice said. Nothing more. No names, no emotion. Just a command, as simple as shifting a fence post. Logan's eyes narrowed. Surveyor, a title, not a person. Or worse, both. Natalie's face went pale in the winter light, her lips parting as if the word had scraped her teeth. Logan looked down at the radio in his hand and felt the shape of the real enemy sharpen into view. Not just thugs, not just scouts. A coordinator, someone measuring the forest like property. Someone who could tell men to move the line and make it happen. Logan clicked the radio off, but the silence didn't feel safer. It felt like the moment right before a trap closed. He leaned close to Natalie, voice low. "We don't go back," he said. "We don't go straight. We make them come where the ground belongs to us." Hawk's ears flicked, approving the plan without understanding the words. Natalie swallowed, pain and resolve braided tight. "And Eddie Knox?" she asked. Logan stared into the trees where the snow kept falling like ash from an unseen fire. "We confirm," he said. "Then we choose what kind of justice fits." And somewhere behind them, the linekeepers adjusted, obedient to a voice called Surveyor, while 3 fugitives and 1 war dog moved like a small myth through the winter, refusing to become another cross in the snow. Snow kept falling in thin, stubborn sheets, the kind that made the world look forgiven while it was still committing sins underneath. Logan Pierce didn't let the softness fool him. After the radio phrase, "Surveyor says move the line," something in him clicked from escape to structure. Predators with a process could be beaten by a better process, and Logan had spent a lifetime learning that procedures were just habits with costumes on. He guided Natalie and Hawk off the creek bed and up into a stand of fir where branches sagged low, heavy with white, making a ceiling that swallowed moonlight. Natalie's breathing sounded cleaner than it had an hour ago, but her shoulders still held the memory of ropes, and when she flexed her taped wrists, the wince that crossed her face was fast and furious, as if pain itself had insulted her. Hawk moved like a shadow that had learned manners, 8 years old, black and tan coat dusted with frost, ears slicing the air for information. He didn't bark, because barking was for dogs that still believed the world was fair. Logan pulled his worn brown leather jacket tighter, the faded seams creaking softly over the red and black plaid flannel beneath, and hated the sound of the leather for betraying him. Then almost laughed at himself because the universe had a dark sense of timing and a cruel love of irony. "We stop running," he whispered, not a speech, just a decision spoken into the cold so it would be real. Natalie didn't argue. That was the first proof she was not merely surviving. She was adapting. She crouched beside a downed log and drew a quick triangle in the powder with a gloved finger, the movement practiced like she'd done this on a hood of a patrol car with a ballpoint pen and a stale coffee, back when her world still had predictable edges. "Crossmark isn't one site," she said, voice low, professional, each word clipped as if she could file it later. It's a route, 3 crosses that form a triangle around a ravine cut. In storms, they use it because roads disappear, but the ravine stays. The crosses are the only clean landmarks that don't vanish under snow. Logan watched her finger trace the points again. Point A, point B, point C, then circle the narrow throat of the ravine where the wind would funnel and sound would carry. He pictured men moving in that corridor with radios and confidence, convinced they owned the lines because they had named them. He'd seen that kind of ownership before in deserts and alleys and places that smelled like burned metal. It always ended the same way when someone refused to kneel. "Which point do they favor?" Logan asked. Natalie's eyes lifted, hazel green even in the dim, sharp with a new kind of faith in patterns, not institutions. "Point B," she said. "Second marker. It's the handoff, where they confirm the line is clear. Whoever holds the radio there is usually the one who can call surveyor's attention." Hawk's ears flicked at the tone of her voice. Then he turned his muzzle into the wind and paused, nostrils flaring, reading the cold as if it were scripture. Logan didn't need a sermon. He needed timing. He led them along a deer trail that ran high, parallel to the ravine, but out of the obvious funnel, and he chose places where rocks broke the snow crust, so their footprints looked like scattered animal travel, rather than a straight human story. Natalie followed, steadying herself on trunks when the ground pitched, refusing to ask for help, but accepting it in the small ways that kept them alive, letting Hawk press his shoulder to her leg when her balance wavered, letting Logan's hand hover near her elbow without grabbing it, dignity preserved like a fragile piece of glass. When the trees thinned, they saw it, the ravine's dark mouth below, a bruise cut into the white earth, with a pale cross standing on the near edge like a crude exclamation mark. It was painted white, fresh enough to reflect moonlight, and the sight of it made Natalie's jaw tighten as if she tasted old humiliation. Logan studied the ground around it. Faint traffic, subtle disturbances, a place where boots had compacted the snow again and again. Not many, not a crowd, a small team, a checkpoint, not a battlefield. "We don't win by being loud," Logan murmured. "We win by taking their voice." Natalie nodded once. "The radio," she agreed. "We need the one who carries it." Logan shifted into motion with the quiet certainty of a man returning to a language he wished he'd forgotten. He pointed with 2 fingers, Hawk wide, then tapped his own chest. Me close, then touched 2 knuckles to Natalie's glove. "Your job, tie and confirm." Hawk slid away into the trees without a sound, becoming the forest's own rumor. Logan and Natalie crawled to a fallen pine that lay like a bridge above a narrow dip. From there they could see the cross and the shallow approach path that curved to it. Logan's breath slowed until it barely fogged. He counted seconds the way some people counted prayers, and in the space between snowflakes he listened for the smallest betrayals. A boot-scraping rock, a radio squelch. The muttered bravado men used to keep fear from showing. The first sound arrived as a whisper of crunching steps, 2 men, spaced apart, moving with cautious confidence. They weren't the warehouse brutes from Natalie's earlier nightmare. These were field hands, the kind that lived on cigarettes and cheap energy drinks, convinced that cruelty was a trade like logging. The lead man was tall and narrow, early 30s, with a sharp face that looked permanently tired, stubble dark along his jaw, and a thin scar under one cheekbone, like punctuation to a violent sentence. He wore a gray beanie pulled low and carried a handheld radio clipped to his chest strap, thumb resting on the push to talk like it was a trigger. The second was shorter and thicker through the shoulders, late 20s, with a rounder face and eyes that darted too much, nervous, eager to be noticed, holding a crowbar that looked ridiculous against all this snow, like he expected winter itself to crack open and hand him a prize. Logan didn't hate them yet. Hate was hot and messy. Logan preferred cold. He waited until they reached the cross, and the tall one angled his radio toward his mouth. That moment, when a man believes he is about to speak and be obeyed, is the moment his attention narrows. Hawk, somewhere unseen, made it happen. A sudden metallic shriek from the far right, as if something heavy had been tipped into something hollower. Both men snapped their heads toward the sound. The nervous one lifted the crowbar too high, too fast, revealing exactly how frightened he was underneath his costume. The tall one hesitated, radio hand pausing mid-motion. Logan moved then, not a sprint, not a movie charge, just a decisive glide from cover to proximity. He came up behind the tall one and clamped a hand over the man's mouth, the other controlling the radio strap so it didn't smack the cross. The tall man jerked, elbow flaring, but Logan hooked the elbow, twisted, and turned the motion into a controlled collapse into the snow at the base of the white-painted beam. The second man spun, crowbar raised, but Hawk appeared in the periphery like a myth with teeth. No bite, just pressure, forcing the man to shuffle backward, foot slipping on the ravine's hard crust. He windmilled, nearly fell, and that half-second of clumsy panic was enough. Natalie surged forward, faster than her injuries had any right to allow, and kicked the crowbar away with the heel of her boot, then dropped her knee onto the man's shoulder blades with the clean efficiency of a cop who'd decided she was done being displayed. The man yelped. Natalie didn't gloat. She zip-tied his wrists, tight and neat, then looked to Logan for the next step, like a partner who'd found her footing again. Logan had the tall one pinned already, forearm controlling the man's throat without choking him, just stealing leverage. "Quiet," Logan whispered into his ear, almost kind, because kindness could be a weapon too. "If you yell, your friend freezes in the ravine. If you don't, you get to keep your teeth." The tall man's eyes rolled toward the cross, then toward Hawk, and the bravado drained out of him like heat from a cracked window. Logan stripped the handheld radio and tossed it to Natalie without looking. She caught it instinctively and turned the volume down until only the faintest hiss remained, a whisper of their enemy's breath. Logan frisked the tall man quickly, gloves, pocket knife, cheap flashlight, then found the real treasure, a phone in a waterproof case, screen protected, battery high. Not a civilian's casual phone, a tool. He unlocked it with the man's thumb before the man could think to resist, because resistance was always slow when your body was pinned and your pride was losing. The lock screen opened onto a simple notes app, and a calendar reminder did labeled in plain words that tried too hard to sound ordinary. "Delivery tonight." Logan tapped it once, and the details expanded like a bruise blooming. "Beacon check scheduled. Technician confirms signal suppression. Meet at crossmark B." No extra bodies. Logan felt Natalie's presence beside him like a blade being drawn. She read over his shoulder, breath catching. Beneath the details was a line that turned the cold into something sharper. Eddie Knox, verify beacon. And below that a single initial, lonely and heavy as a fingerprint, S. Logan didn't look at Natalie right away. He stared at the letter and felt the forest shift around them, as if the trees themselves understood that the game had moved from thugs and scouts to names. Hawk returned silently to Logan's side, eyes bright, tail low, as if asking the oldest question, "Are we still prey?" Logan exhaled once, slow. "Now we know where the line goes next," he murmured. Natalie's voice came out hoarse, not from cold, but from the weight of betrayal becoming a schedule item. "Eddie," she said, and the name sounded like grief and anger sharing a single throat. Logan closed the phone, slipped it into his pocket, and looked out toward the ravine where the white cross stood like a lie pretending to be holy. "And S," he said quietly. "Surveyor." or something worse. The captured man on the snow tried to speak then, lips trembling, but Logan pressed 2 fingers to his mouth, gentle, warning, and the man fell silent, eyes wide, because he understood at last that the forest had changed owners for the night. Night returned the way it always did in Pine Hollow's backcountry, not with drama, but with inevitability. The snow thickened into a soft veil, and the pines stood like old witnesses who had seen too much to be impressed by human cruelty. Logan Pierce watched the ravine from higher ground, the worn brown leather jacket tight at his shoulders, the red and black plaid flannel beneath it, like a stubborn ember refusing to die. Hawk sat beside him, 8 years old and built like a quiet verdict. Black and tan coat dusted with white, muzzle slightly silvered, eyes dark with the calm of a creature who had learned that noise was optional. Natalie Brooks knelt behind a boulder a few yards away. Phone held low in her gloved hands, recording app open, but the screen dimmed to a faint glow. Her auburn hair had escaped its tie and clung in frost-stiff strands near her temple. Rope burns still ringed her wrists like ugly bracelets, and her shoulders moved with the careful restraint of someone carrying invisible bruises under skin. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a woman who had stared at the bottom of betrayal and decided to climb out with her teeth if she had to. They didn't have a clean way out. They had a clean way in, into the enemy's process. And in a world where predators relied on routine, routine was a leash you could pull. Logan had the captured radio man's phone in his palm, the cheap waterproof case cold against his gloves. The calendar note still sat there like a smirk. Delivery, tonight. Technician, Eddie Knox. And the lone letter, S, hanging at the end like a hook. Natalie leaned closer, voice barely existing. "If the beacon fails," she whispered, "someone higher has to decide. They don't trust underlings with a compromised line." Logan nodded once, not because he loved plans, but because plans were the only honest thing in a storm. He typed with slow, deliberate thumbs, choosing words the way a hunter chose bait. Simple, believable, urgent. He used the captured man's message thread, contacts already dirty, already part of the line. Beacons glitching. Signal drops. Holding at crossmark 3. Need, check, now. He hit send, then killed the screen and tucked the phone into his jacket like it was a venomous thing. Hawk's ears twitched at the faint electronic click and then settled again. The dog didn't like devices. Devices were how men tried to replace instincts. Logan shifted his gaze toward the third cross, crossmark C, visible through the trees as a pale vertical slash. In daylight, it might have looked like a crude memorial. At night, in falling snow, it looked like a chess piece, a marker in a game played with lungs and blood. "We don't chase," Logan breathed. "We anchor." Natalie nodded without taking her eyes off the ravine mouth. She adjusted her phone angle slightly, bracing her elbow against rock to steady the shot. Her hands trembled once, not fear, not weakness, just adrenaline trying to spill out of a body that had been forced to hang like a warning sign. She swallowed and steadied herself again. Hawk glanced at her, then back to the dark, as if he understood humans needed rituals too. Minutes passed. The forest softened into that tense quiet that wasn't natural, birds absent, wind reduced to a hush, as if the land itself was waiting for the next bad choice. Then came the sound, tires biting frozen gravel on an old logging spur that shouldn't have been used in winter. An engine idled low, disciplined. Not a drunk joyride, not a lost hunter, a purpose-built arrival. Headlights stayed off until the last second, then flickered once through trunks like a predator blinking. A pickup rolled into a small clearing near crossmark 3 and stopped with a quiet confidence that made Logan's stomach tighten. The truck was dark, mud-splattered, practical, no shine, no vanity. A man stepped out first, moving quickly, shoulders hunched against the cold. Even at a distance, Natalie's breath caught. "Eddie?" she whispered. Eddie Knox looked exactly like someone who lived in the margins. Mid-30s, tall but narrow, with a stringy build made more from sleeplessness than strength. He wore a thick work jacket stained faintly at the cuffs, gloves with the fingertips rubbed thin, and a knit cap pulled low over messy brown hair that looked hacked by his own impatience. His face was pale from too many hours under shop lights, cheekbones sharp, eyes ringed by tired shadows. He carried a hard plastic case and a compact antenna unit like a medic carrying a kit into the wrong kind of emergency. He didn't look cruel. He looked anxious, like a man who kept telling himself he was fixing problems, not creating graves. Eddie walked straight to the base of the white cross and knelt, opening his case. Tools glinted briefly in the thin moonlight, a small meter, a coil of wire, a stubby screwdriver. He worked fast, glancing over his shoulder twice as if expecting someone to scold him for being late. Logan watched Eddie's hands and felt a flicker of something dangerous. Pity. Pity could get you killed, but it also told you where the weak seam in a system lived. Then the passenger door opened, slower, like an exhale. The second man stepped out, and the forest seemed to tighten around him. He was not large. He didn't need to be. He moved with compact control, mid-40s maybe, dressed in dark winter layers that didn't rustle, hood down despite the snow. His posture was straight but not stiff, like a man who carried discipline the way some carried religion. He walked toward the cross and stopped at a measured distance, looking at it not like something sacred, not like something shameful, but like a coordinate on a board. Natalie's phone caught his silhouette and the faint line of his face. Clean-shaven, sharp jaw, nose straight, eyes narrowed with the focused calm of someone who believed outcomes were owed to him. He scanned the clearing once, not with panic, but with the cold habit of a planner checking for errors. Then he looked down at Eddie like Eddie was not a man, but a tool. "Fix it," the second man said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The authority in it was older than shouting. Eddie nodded too quickly. "I'm on it," he muttered, and Logan heard the tone, fear dressed as competence. Natalie's lips parted soundlessly, and her gaze sharpened like a blade finding its edge. "That's him," she breathed. "Surveyor." The title fit the way he moved, measuring, claiming, shifting lines, as if the forest itself was his property. Surveyor crouched, took the small beacon housing from Eddie, and examined it for half a second like a jeweler inspecting a flaw. "You're late," he said. Eddie flinched. "The weather," Eddie began, then stopped, swallowing the rest like a man used to being corrected with consequences. Surveyor's eyes swept the trees again. "Weather is an excuse for prey," he said, and something in the sentence told Logan this wasn't just smuggling. This was obsession, control for its own sake. Natalie kept recording, thumb steady, capturing voice, face, the beacon, the cross. Evidence, real evidence, not stories told in a diner. Logan shifted slightly behind his ridge cover, repositioning so he had the truck's driver's side door in his sightline. He wasn't interested in fighting. He was interested in doors, in exits, in preventing the usual escape where men like Surveyor erased a scene and left nothing but a cold lesson. Hawk rose silently, muscles coiling, and Logan touched the dog's scruff once. Grounding, permission, promise. Eddie finished his check and spoke without looking up. "Beacon's not dead," he said. "It's jammed, or someone's spoofing the signal. I can reset, but—" Surveyor's gaze snapped to him. "No," Surveyor said. "If it's jammed, it's because someone is close." Eddie's face went whiter. "It could be interference," he tried weakly. Surveyor straightened, and the movement was so controlled it felt like a threat. He stepped toward the cross, reached behind it, and pulled loose a concealed panel where a second device sat. Another beacon, another relay. Redundancy. Habit. A system built by someone who believed betrayal was constant. Surveyor's mouth tightened. "We don't reset," he said. "We burn the node." Eddie's eyes widened. "But the shipment—" Surveyor cut him off with a glance. "Shipment is replaceable," he said. "Exposure is not." Logan felt Natalie's breath hitch. She understood what burn meant in a man like this. Destroy evidence, remove witnesses, erase the line. Surveyor moved toward the truck, hand sliding into his coat. And that small gesture, so ordinary, was the first crack in his composure. A weapon, maybe. A lighter. A phone. Something meant to end this neatly. Logan didn't give him the neat ending. He rose from cover in one smooth motion and stepped into the clearing's edge, just far enough to be seen, not close enough to be caught. Hawk stepped with him, silent and massive, a dark shape against the snow like an old god returning to collect a debt. Surveyor froze. Eddie's head snapped up, eyes flaring with shock and relief, colliding. Natalie stayed hidden, camera rolling, because the best trap was one your enemy didn't realize was already documented. Surveyor's gaze locked onto Logan's leather jacket, then to Hawk's steady posture, and for the first time something human flickered in Surveyor's expression. Calculation turning into uncertainty. "You're not supposed to be here," Surveyor said, voice still calm, but the calm was thinner now. Logan didn't answer with bravado. He answered with truth. "Neither is she," he said, nodding toward the cross. Surveyor's eyes narrowed. "Where is the officer?" he demanded, and that question, sharp, possessive, was a gift, because it proved motive. Natalie's jaw clenched behind her cover. Hawk took one step forward and stopped, perfectly aligned in front of Surveyor's path to the truck. Teeth didn't show. They didn't need to. The message was clear anyway. Stand down. Eddie's hands trembled over his tools. "Sir," he whispered, "we should leave." Surveyor's head turned slightly. "Quiet," he said, and the word landed like a slap. Eddie flinched again, shoulders caving a fraction. Logan watched and felt the final piece settle into place. Eddie wasn't the mastermind. Eddie was the maintenance crew for a monster. Surveyor took another step toward the truck. Hawk mirrored him, blocking again, closer now. Surveyor's gaze dropped to Hawk's teeth and then lifted back to Logan. "Call your friend off," Surveyor said. Logan's mouth tightened into something almost like a smile, humor as dry as winter bark. "He's not a friend," Logan said softly. "He's a boundary." That was when Surveyor's hand came out of his coat. Not a gun, smaller. A compact remote device, thumb poised over a button. Logan recognized the type. Trigger? Kill switch. Something that could wipe a beacon, fry a relay, or set a charge. Surveyor's eyes flicked to the cross as if picturing flame. Natalie's blood. It went cold. She couldn't let him erase the node before state-level eyes arrived. Logan moved, not toward Surveyor, but toward the remote's future. He stepped to the side, forcing Surveyor to turn to keep him in view, and in that fractional rotation Hawk lunged, not for flesh, but for the hand. A clean clamp on the wrist, pressure enough to lock joints, not enough to tear. The remote dropped into the snow with a dull thud. Surveyor grunted, shock cracking his composure like ice. He tried to yank free, but Hawk held, eyes dark and unblinking, a silent sermon. No. Eddie stumbled backward, hands raised, mouth open in a soundless plea. Natalie rose from cover then, camera still rolling, voice suddenly clear and official. "Don't move," she commanded. And it wasn't theater. It was the core of her again, the part they'd tried to hang from a cross and failed to kill. Surveyor's head snapped toward her, and in that look was recognition, hatred, and the ugly certainty that he had underestimated her twice. Logan stepped forward just enough to retrieve the remote from the snow with his boot, kicking it away into a drift where it vanished. Then he kept his distance, because distance was safety and because he refused to become the kind of man who solved everything with hands. Natalie's thumb hovered over her phone screen. She wasn't calling local channels. She wasn't praying for a compromised town to save her. She dialed the number she'd kept separate for emergencies. State Dispatch Liaison, cleaner air, higher ground. The call connected. Natalie spoke fast, precise, giving broad landmarks and a code phrase she'd learned in training. Officer down earlier. Corruption suspected. Evidence in progress. Request immediate state response. No local involvement. The line didn't argue. It accepted. Minutes later, headlights appeared through the trees. Multiple vehicles, stronger presence. The kind of arrival that made men like Surveyor remember they were not gods, only bullies with paperwork. State troopers poured into the clearing with disciplined speed, weapons ready but controlled, flashlights carving white scars through snow. A tall woman stepped forward, late 40s, straight-backed, dark hair pulled into a tight bun, face sharp with focus, and a tired intolerance for games. Captain Elise Morrow, Natalie's contact, had described her once as clean fire. Her eyes took in the cross, the devices, Eddie's shaking hands, Surveyor's pinned wrist, Hawk's controlled bite, Logan's stillness. Officer Brooks, Morrow said, voice clipped and absolute. Natalie lifted her phone. Recorded, she said. Beacon system, technician, Surveyor. Surveyor tried to speak, to charm, to rewrite the story with his tone, but Morrow's gaze cut him off like a door slamming. Troopers cuffed him. Hawk released on Logan's signal instantly, as disciplined as a blade returning to its sheath. Eddie Knox sank to his knees, face crumpling as if his body had finally admitted what his mind refused. He had been maintaining hell's infrastructure and calling it work. Morrow's people secured the truck, collected the beacons and relay units, photographed everything, bagged devices with gloves like ritual, like cleansing. Natalie's shoulders sagged once, a small collapse of tension. Then she straightened again, because surviving wasn't the same as being finished. The final act wasn't an arrest. It was a symbol, quiet but heavy. A trooper looped a strap around the white cross and pulled. The wood resisted for a second, stubborn, then tilted and fell into the snow with a soft crack, like a cheap myth breaking. Snow drifted onto it immediately, gentle as a shroud. Logan watched the cross lying there, white paint smudged, and felt something in his chest loosen. Not triumph, not joy. Just a small release, like a knot undone after years of being pulled tight. He hadn't gone looking to be a hero. He'd gone out to check a fence line after a storm. He'd walked into a place that needed a decent man and a decent dog, and the forest, this time, had refused to stay silent. The miracle in this story didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived, like it so often does, quietly. A man who tried to disappear still turned back. A loyal old dog still chose to stand between cruelty and the vulnerable. Sometimes God doesn't split the sky to rescue us. Sometimes He places a stranger passing by at the exact moment we're running out of strength. A steady hand, a brave choice, a heart that refuses to look away. That's the deeper truth here. Evil tried to steal the meaning of the cross and use it as a marker for fear. But symbols don't belong to darkness. Their true meaning belongs to love, courage, and truth. And when that false crossmark finally fell, it reminded us that God can take what was meant for harm and turn it into a doorway out, turn old wounds into shelter, turn silence into testimony, turn a trap into a path home. And in everyday life, the winter forest doesn't always look like snow and trees. It can look like a hard week, a broken promise, a betrayal, a sickness in the family, a season where trust feels risky and the world feels cold. But the lesson stays the same. Don't let darkness define you. Choose the good, especially when it's small and unnoticed. A call to check on someone, a voice that speaks up, a moment where you protect what's right, even when it costs you. God often builds big miracles from small obedience. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you've ever experienced a quiet miracle in your own life, we'd truly love to read it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story of loyalty, faith, and courage. Before you go, let's pray together. Lord, bless every person watching right now. Guard their homes, their loved ones, and every faithful companion who walks beside them. Bring healing to hidden wounds, peace to anxious hearts, and strength for the days that feel too heavy. Help us choose love over fear, truth over silence, and courage over comfort. Keep us safe, guide our steps, and remind us that you are near, even in the storm. In Jesus' name, amen.